Hi everyone, and welcome along to Sonic Academy with me, Chris. Today I'm joined by a producer who is seen as one of the founding fathers of the scene. He not only champions its sound, but the essence of trance through his Pure Trance brand. He has released singles since 1994 and has played every famous club and festival in the world, and he also has a massive weekly radio show. Would you please welcome to Sonic Academy none other than Rich from Solarstone. Hi Rich, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Long time no speak. We used to see each other regularly on the road. How's things with you at the moment?
Things are great. Extremely busy. Recovering from a series of unfortunate incidents, including crashing my car. And which really...
Tell us, I saw it on Facebook, you within 5 days you totaled your car and you also broke your ankle. Is dementia setting in or something? Is it?
Possibly, yeah. Well, the thing is, they say these things come in threes, and I'm just waiting for the third thing to happen.
Lovely.
But I'm okay. You know, the only problem is it's such a busy time for me at the moment because I'm working on Pure Trance 5, which is coming out in October, and also the new Solarstone album, which is severely overdue, and. This happened at completely the worst possible moment. You know, I had to cancel gigs in Ibiza and in San Francisco, and it was just been a real pain in the arse. But I think I'm okay now.
Has it given you time to sit in the studio, maybe do some work in the studio now that you're sort of laid up? Is it?
Initially, it wasn't because I had to keep my leg elevated. Okay. So, it was so frustrating. But I'm back in the studio now. Actually, to be honest with you, the amount of time I've got seems to have seriously diminished for some reason. And now I'm on this really tight deadline for absolutely everything. I mean, as far as the new album goes, on my computer, the folder in which I put everything for my new album is called 2014 album. So I'm 2 years late.
Let's talk a little bit about the album. How long, like when you're sitting down to do a track, how long does it take you to put a track together? Do you time limit yourself to like a few days or a week, or is it just whatever?
I do work much better to deadlines, definitely. It's not like in the old days where I could spend 3 or 4 months. You remember yourself, you'd spend like 3 or 4 months on a track. Yeah. You'd go back to it and you'd procrastinate. These days I have to be a lot more put much stricter limits and deadlines on myself. But with a remix or something, I mean, if I get a deadline which is a week, I can definitely do it in a week. Sometimes I can, well, you probably know yourself, sometimes I can wake up in the morning with a track fully formed in my head and I can do it in a day, but then I might go back to it 7 or 8 times over the next month, sort of adding things and editing things. But I don't know, it depends really. It depends. Sometimes I can spend days just creating sounds, just creating, I don't know, for example, recording chords from my guitar and creating a bank of chord patterns, chord sets. So I'll have a C major, a C minor, whatever, and I can spend a day just creating stuff, and then when actually producing a track, then I've already spent that day creating a sound that I can use. Mm-hmm. So it's not really a case of creating a new track from scratch. What I'm doing really is sort of plundering my own archive of sounds that I've spent 20 odd years creating.
And do you have a template that you open up and it's kind of got a particular set of instruments open and effects and returns and stuff set up so it gives you that Solarstone sound?
Not exactly. I mean, sometimes I'll carry over a percussion and bass template from one track to another, simply because I don't want to spend my time trying to find a kick drum sound and EQ in a hi-hat again every time. It's absolutely pointless. But one thing that I do is I work in Cubase 8 Pro. One of the things I do is whenever I create a really great sound or a really great arpeggiator or a great set of EQs for a particular instrument, say for example a vocal, I'll save that as a track preset in Cubase into a nice little neat folder of my own. So if I'm working with a singer who I've worked with previously, I can recall the group settings for their vocal instantly, so I don't have to go through the laborious half-day long procedure of trying to find the best set of plugins for their voice. Mm-hmm. Also, I'll save things like if I come up with a really nice pad, creating a sound on a virtual instrument, and then with with suitable distortion and compression and stuff, I'll save that as a track preset. So if I'm working on a track later on and I think, I had a really great pad sound in Dual or something, I can just go to my track presets folder and load up the Dual pad. So that does speed things up a lot. I mean, if you go back 20 or 15 or 20 years ago when you and I were first started producing, if you wanted to recall a sound from a previous track, you had to just remember what you'd used, right? And it was a nightmare, whereas these days it's so much easier.
I mean, I remember you used to have 20 free slots in, say, like a Nord Lead or a JP to save your user presets, and then you would have to calculate which sound can I ditch here to save this great new preset. You didn't have these as constant banks, and we had an old Mackie, not a digital 8-bus but 8-bus, and you would have A4 sheets of the knobs, and you would draw in where the knobs were the of the EQ settings, and so if you wanted to recall a mix, you'd have to get out the sheets and try and match the EQ.
That's what we did too. We used to do it all on graph paper, but I don't think I've still got all of those pieces of paper, but I don't think I ever used any of them. I don't know. I mean, recently I was trying to go back through my old S3000 floppy disks looking for particular sounds and stuff, and my sampler didn't seem to be working anymore, so I went and bought a new one which cost me £100 off eBay.
Okay.
And then none of the disks would load into it, and I worked out that it was because the sounds were saved on floppy disks using a particular format on the S3000, and the one I bought was formatted with a different operating system, and I couldn't find the previous operating system, so I can't access any of those sounds at all.
And you've got
I spent days on that.
You big archive. And I'd love to go through some, because I've got old zip disks and stuff. Let's go back to the start. I became aware of you in probably 95, 96 with a track that still is one of my favourite tracks, called The Calling. You started out as a trio in Birmingham. How did it all kind of start for you?
Before the Solarstone, the three of us were called the Space Kittens. But before that, I was the keyboard player, songwriter, and backing vocalist in an indie dance band called Emission, and that started in 1990 or 1991, I think.
Okay.
We used to. We were a three-piece. There was me and a singer called Stu and an amazing guitarist called Jay, and we were kind of a bit like the Shaman or EMF, sort of crossed with Carter, the Unstoppable Sex Machine.
Yeah.
And we used to play locally. We did some gigs around the country with people like Ned's Atomic Dustbin, and at one of the last Emission gigs, I was introduced to this guy called Andy, who was a bit of a fan of the band, and he said to me, "Have you ever thought about making a house record?" And I just thought, well, why not give it a try, kind of thing. So I went down to his house. He was still living with his mum and dad at the time, and he had a couple of bits of equipment, and we spent a day working on this track we called Arizona. And then he played it to his mate, who was called Sam. And Sam had loads of equipment, and he knew how to use it as well. He had like loads of analog gear, like he had a 909, which he'd got from a car boot sale for £30.
Wow.
And he had a 101 and a Juno 106 and a Juno 2 and a sequential circuits Pro 1, which are now worth about £5,000.
Yeah.
And he knew how to use all this stuff. So we went over to his bedroom in his parents' house, and we probably spent the best part of a year in there, producing, the earlier tracks were quite kind of sort of like acid disco stuff as the Space Kittens. Mm-hmm. We set up our own label and we released our first record. The label was called Sunflower Vibes, and there were these two tracks on it called Storm and Dolphin. And Jerry from Hooge heard them. I think he'd just heard it. I don't know where he'd heard it from. And the next thing you know, Pete Tong played them both on the Essential Selection in the same show.
Uh-huh.
And that was like incredible. That was in 1995.
Yeah.
And then it kind of went from there. Jerry signed the track, Storm, he released that. Then we did a series of remixes for people like Perfecto and East West.
Yeah.
And then it was in 1996 we did The Calling, and it was like a different sound, and so we decided to use a new name, Solarstone. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of went from there,
It's amazing. It's an amazing story. So I must have been a huge buzz at that time when you're getting played by Pete Tong, Red Jerry, huge tunes. These were all sort of classic and perfecto you were remixing for. It must have been, as a young guy, must have been pretty exciting.
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, the thing is, I knew about the music, but I didn't really know anything about the scene at all. I never entertained the idea of DJing or anything. Mm-hmm. It was just purely a studio project then. But I remember listening to the Essential mix and or the Essential selection and hearing Storm come on, and it was a proper like jumping around the room, because that was the show, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. The Essential selection was the show. Pete Tong was the man. Yeah. And when he played Storm, and then I was completely elated, and then about half an hour later he played another track, Dolphin, from the EP, and that was it then. And then the phone started ringing, and Pete Bones called, he wanted to sign it to his label, and Jerry called saying he wanted to sign it to Hooge, and yeah, it was quite incredible. Of course, in those days, the checks that you'd get as well for selling records were astronomical. You'd be disappointed if you only sold 10,000 copies of a record.
Yeah.
Whereas now you can get into the Beatport top 20 on the back of 100 downloads.
Yeah, no, it's. I remember talking to a label once, and they were talking about curiosity sales. Says, we'll do about 6,000 or 7,000 of these in curiosity sales. And I went, what's that? And they went, people just curious. They'll buy the record for £7, and they're a fan of the label, so they'll buy anything on the label. And you went, so you started out with 7,000, 8,000 sales, So yeah, those were the days when you sold. We did 30,000, 40,000 copies of a single back then, and it was that's when it all added up into something interesting. So what was your first setup? What was your first little studio?
Well, I did originally when I was in the band. I did everything on. Well, initially it was on a Korg M1, mm-hmm. which I bought from a great aunt who I'd only ever met a couple of times. Left me £1,000 in her will, mm-hmm. and then when she died, I was surprised by this £1,000, and I bought a Korg M1. It was about £700, and I used that for a couple of years, and then it was the T2. So when I met Andy and Sam, I only had this T2 and an Atari ST. Mm-hmm. And then when I went into the studio with Sam and Andy, like I said, it was all this analog gear. There was like a Mackie 32 channel desk. We had 2 little Novation base stations which were screwed to the wall, and we had the Pro 1, a Juno 2, a 106, a 101, 2 samplers, an S3000 and an S3000 XL, and then we bought the Nord Lead the day it came out for £1,400, which I've still got and I still use in the studio. I think that was about it, and that was all run by the Atari ST, and I think that was it until 1998, when we'd moved the studio out of Sam's bedroom into a flat above a shop in Dudley in the UK, because we all wanted to be able to go when Sam was at university, and we were there for a while, and then we got burgled. Some guys smashed the door in, and they took absolutely everything. Oh no, that's not what happened. Actually, no, we got burgled. These guys tried to smash the door in, but they'd failed. So what we did was we panicked and we moved all the gear back to Sam's dad's house, which was just over the road. And then a couple of nights later, they burgled his dad's house, and they took absolutely everything apart from the sampler, I think, and the computer and the speakers. So we lost all the gear, and that was the point at which Sam decided that he didn't want to be in the band anymore. Mm-hmm. So me and Andy decided to spend all of our money on some new equipment. I can't remember what we bought now, but I think we bought a PC at that point, and that was when VST began.
Mm-hmm.
The days of VST.
Mm-hmm.
Funny thing about Cubase VST was, for the first year of using Cubase VST, I was using it and stuff, and I spoke to a friend of mine, and he said, "What do you think of Cubase VST?" And I said, "Well, I like it, but I find it really frustrating that there's only 8 audio channels." And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, you can only have 8 audio channels." He said, "Well, have you not tried increasing the number of channels?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I went into the audio setup, and he said, "Where it says 8 audio channels, just double click it and type in any number you want, like 100 or 500. And I was so used to the days of, 4-track tape and 8-track tape, that I thought that was the limit you had, and I was bouncing things down to save myself space. That goes to show how I was completely, I wasn't computer literate at all then.
Yeah, no, but I don't think many of us were, because this was all new technology and stuff. I remember about 98 getting the first Cubase VST, which could record, audio, and then I stupidly, right at the height of our career, decided to change software to Logic, and just the whole studio ground to halt for about 8 months while I learned Logic, because I'd heard BT use Logic and he was doing amazing stuff, so I went, I have to use Logic. And I always say it in every interview, I still miss Cubase and some of the things it does. I really do. I loved it as a program. So let's fast forward to you got in your studio with Andy. You probably had a little bit of a lull that time, and then things start happening again. Is that right? There's been quite a lots of peaks and troughs with Solarstone, hasn't there?
Yeah, well, that is probably the best way of describing my career. I mean, it has been like proper up and down. Mm-hmm. There's been about 4 ups and five downs probably. Uh-huh. When Sam first left, there was a short period of time, about 6 months, where we were producing some pretty ropey stuff. But then I think it was that we stumbled on the Z2 sound, this quite sort of dark sound, Z2, and we set up Deep Blue Records, and we released the first Z2 track. That was in '99, and then it was just onwards from there. We did the Z2 stuff, Seven Cities, yep. Solar Coaster. Then, of course, we were signed exclusively to Hooge Tunes, and we'd signed an album deal with Hooge, and we were working on an album. We received half of the advance. I think the advance was like 30 grand or something ridiculous. Mm-hmm. We'd received half the advance and we did half the album, and then the label completely changed direction, and they weren't interested in melodic trance anymore. It all went really sort of deep and progressive, mm-hmm. and they didn't want to release any more of our material, but we were signed exclusively to them. So then there was a period when nothing came out at all. I think did a series of remixes for like Moonman Galaxia and Perfecto, Bullet in the Gun and stuff like that. Yeah. And I remember Judge Jules saying in an interview, Solarstone are going to be the big thing in 2001 or something. And we didn't release a single record in 2001, 2002. And then Hooge went bust, and then we were able to release material elsewhere, and then things started to improve, and that went pretty well for a few years. But over that time, Andy started kind of losing interest in the music, and he'd come into the studio, and all he wanted to do was do sort of like funky house and electro and all this kind of thing, which I wasn't really into, and that's when we've really started to grow apart. Mm-hmm. That's, to be honest with you, I mean, I'd always handled the controls in Solarstone, but previous to that, Andy did used to contribute musical ideas, mm-hmm. and it started to change, and I sort of became solo a couple of years before it actually happened officially,
And that was probably, 2002, 2003, is that kind of around that era?
Maybe 2003, 2004, I think. Something like that, yeah.
And so you've obviously then kept this deep love of trance, that's been your... You're singly focused on doing trance music. You've never really deviated from that sound, and it's now come back to be your benefit, with this Pure Trance brand that you've started. I mean, how did that formulate, and how did that come about?
Well, I think the love of trance thing, I think that comes from the music I grew up listening to. I always loved highly polished melodic music, like anything produced by Trevor Horn, Jeff Lynne from ELO, Supertramp, Genesis. That's the kind of thing my mum used to play when I was a kid. And then it was Frankie Goes to Hollywood and the Pet Shop Boys. So always this really meticulously produced melodic sound. Mm-hmm. And I've tried my hand at producing other things, like sort of 80s influence stuff, or maybe a bit of this, maybe a bit of that. But all the elements that I love in music, they're all present in trance music. So that's why I think it's the thing that I like to focus all my energy on, because I get complete satisfaction from producing a trance track. And the reason the whole Pure Trance thing came about was because I found that in sort of about 5 years ago, the trance scene was really at a low point, and all the things I loved about trance, the beauty, the emotion, the pure sounding melodies, it all seemed to be getting replaced by elements of other genres. What a lot of people were calling trance was to me very cold and very digital sounding and very hard sounding. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't like it at all, and I found that there were a few producers still producing music that I kind of liked, like Ali and Fila and people like that, but it really just seemed to be all being replaced. And I felt that as a DJ, the music I was being sent there was so little that I actually liked or wanted to play. And I was doubting my own qualities as a producer as well, because I thought, well, if I produce this music, is anybody going to play it? I mean, it's hard when you do a track and you realise no DJs are going to play it because they're all playing something else. Mm-hmm. Everyone was saying trance was dead, and I just thought, do you know what? If I can't produce the kind of music I want and actually make a career out of it, then I'm going to do something else. But before I do that, I'm going to make an album of the kind of music that I love. Mm-hmm. And it all started off with doing a remix for Orchidia, and I called it the Solarstone Pure Mix. And he said, why have you called it that? And I said, because to me this is pure trance. It doesn't have anything else in it. It's just pure trance. Didn't expect anybody to play it. And then the whole thing just snowballed from there. And I realised that trance had been around so long, and there were millions of people around the world who loved this music. Surely they must have felt the same as me. They must have felt, oh God, I wish I could listen. I wish people still produce music like that. I wish I could go to a party that played music like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when the whole Pure Mix hashtag thing started trending on Twitter, and there was such a huge buzz about what I was doing, and then I released the album, and it went down extremely well, and people loved it, and I thought, I kind of created a little niche for myself in the scene. Mm-hmm. And then we started doing the events around the world, and we've sold out like 40 events so far. And I guess now we're in a place where pure trance is kind of seen as kind of a movement and a sort of a genre, and kind of it's actually established as something valid. I see, like, for example, Ferry Corsten did an interview recently with DJ Mag, I think it was, and they even said, so Ferry's now producing pure trance as Guriella, and that wouldn't have been said before we coined the phrase pure trance. So it's great.
And are you behind the Viva La Trance t-shirts and stuff like that? Yeah. So I mean, that's something you see all over the place, and so I mean, it's you have genuinely created a movement. Probably hadn't intended to create a movement, but you have totally.
The whole thing's grown. The thing is, the whole thing's grown completely organically. I never sort of. Me and Paul and my manager, we kind of did all this together, but we never sat down and with a cynical sort of, right, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and we're going to make people think this, and we're going to say this. This is all completely true. Mm-hmm. It's not that we created something that didn't exist. We kind of just tipped over a boulder that was there waiting to be tipped. We didn't make people love this music, and we didn't do, and I'm not responsible for everything that went before. All I've kind of done is gathered it all together and given it a name.
Yeah, and something to people to hang on. Yeah. You're sitting in the studio on a Tuesday. What day is it? Friday morning. You open up a project. How do you start the Solarstone sound? Is it drums? Is it chords, synths?
All my tracks start off as being a melody and trying to say something melodically with a series of chords. And it doesn't matter what sound I use, or it could be the piano, or I could be messing with my guitar, but normally the piano. And I just play something that gives me that, that little, it's got to have a bit in it that makes me go, oh yeah, that's really, really nice. Mm. And I work out my music just like that, and then I start producing it. So it all begins with the melody and the bass progression and the chord changes, and that's it. And once I've done that, then I start producing it, And
so you start with the piano. What's then the first synth that you open up? Is it massive? Is it silence? What is it?
It's a good question.
All my questions are good questions.
I don't know. I don't have a go-to synth.
Right.
The one I probably use most in terms of VST is Omnisphere, because I like the way you can navigate it, and I like the way the buttons work. And I also have got a Virus TI, which I've been using since the thing first came out, and I still use that every day, simply because I like the fact that I can turn the knobs with my hands. And I can mess around and do things quickly. But what sound, what I want to say. If I want a bell sound, well, I'll think which synth probably has got bells. See, when I get a virtual instrument, I always spend a couple of days going through the thing and getting my head around it and working out what it does well.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, with Selena, that obviously is self-explanatory. It just does a really great pad sound.
Yeah.
Or Synthmaster. That's really good for arpeggios and stuff, I think.
Okay.
So I'll go through that and I'll pick out all my favourite sounds and put them in a little box, work out how it works and stuff like that. So, I don't really I use Massive occasionally, but that's because of Giuseppe.
Mm-hmm.
Funnily enough, Sylenth, which is the one that every producer seems to really hammer, I don't really use, apart from when we do Pure Energy, simply because, I don't know, it's got this... I don't know what it is about. Do you know what? I think I don't use it because everybody else does. I think that's why.
I can completely understand that, because I remember when Viruses came out, I kind of was refusing to use it because I didn't want to sound like everybody else. I thought, look, I'll use Nord leads and other things, just to did not sound like that, probably to my detriment, and that's why I have no career now. So what about drum programming? How do you have instruments, kit set up, or do you bring audio into the timeline and arrange that way? Or
I always use audio. For drums. It's oh, sorry, just my son was just here. What is it, darling?
The PC isn't working properly. The mouse isn't working.
All right. When I finish, I'll come down and fix it. Okay. I've got my son today.
Don't worry. We interviewed Nick Warren, and he had to go and turn off his pies he had in the oven.
Drums. My drums are always really, really simple. I'm completely one for recycling drums. I can happily use the same kick drum in 50 tracks, because to me, it's if a kick sounds good in a club, great. I like my drums to be really, really simple, just like running hats, open hat, snare drum, and a kick drum. Because what I like to do with percussion, rather than layer lots and lots of different like clicks and stuff and shakers and stuff, I like to have like rolling elements in there that filter. So for example, I'm working on a track at the moment and the drums are really, really straight, but I've got this sort of like a loop in there which is kind of sort of, and it filters up and down, and that kind of creates the movement within the track. I try not to have too many percussive elements, because I find that using something like an arpeggiator, or an arpeggiated synth, that also creates movement. So if you've got like an arpeggiated synth which has got a lot of high end, you don't necessarily need any high end percussion. It's one of the reasons my tracks sound so clean, because I try to create things with sounds I've already got rather than adding stuff.
And what about bass? Do you have a go-to synth that's your bass synth? Or again, you talked about Selena's your pads, Varus is probably your plucks. What about bass?
I've been using Omnisphere for bass for the last 5 years.
Right.
Just because I always use Omnisphere for bass. I think it's just because it's easy. The expression in my tracks comes from sounds I create myself. Things like bass lines and drums they're just there to underpin the expressive stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't spend too much time on them. I love creating interesting fills and doing interesting drum programming, but I don't like to layer sounds on top of each other, and I try to avoid using sample packs for stuff like that as well. Like all the risers and all that whole bloody thing. I get sent so many demos which contain the same sounds. Some of the unusual sounds in sample packs as well. I heard a demo yesterday which had a sound in that I'd heard in 2 other tracks. From big names. Yeah. And even big names seem to be using those. If you take an unusual sound from a sample pack that's been downloaded 100,000 times, somebody else is definitely going to use it. I prefer to, if I want a rising sound, I prefer to create one on one of my synths. It only takes 10 minutes, and then you've got something unique.
You still have a lot of outboard synths and stuff. You still integrate that very much into your productions. You're not just totally in the box, are you?
I'm much more in the box than I used to be, but I've still got external effects units that I use, like the AM8000 and the what else have I got? I've got my TI, my Supernova, my Nordlead AM1X. I still try to use those in tracks, but the problem is these days, because I'm so busy, it's the same with Giuseppe. Giuseppe has got this huge studio with all this analog gear, and yet he tries to work in the box now, because we travel so much and we've got so little time, that if you've got 4 or 5 hours to work on something on a plane, you want to be able to recall the whole production, you know?
And are you... Sorry, are you one of these people that can work on a plane? Because I tried it a few times and I thought it was a hateful experience.
The only thing I can do is I can arrange on a plane. I can't create sounds. I can't come up with, the initial part of a production where you're getting all your layers together and you're coming up with sounds and you're EQing stuff. I can't do that on a plane. I just cannot do that on a plane. But if I've got a track to a point where it's, I've started arranging it, if I can open that production on my MacBook on a plane, then I can arrange till the cows come home. Anything that involves, really having to use my ears and be able to tell if something's good or not. I can't do that on a plane. Giuseppe does it all the time. I really don't understand how at all.
I'm with you. I tried it a few times, and I think half of these DJs they get their laptop out and play and take a photograph and then put it away again and watch the movies and drink red wine, which is kind of, that's what they do.
Probably.
The track Lovers, is that your voice? Is that you singing on that track?
On the album version it's me, but on the single version that's somebody else.
Right, okay. And somebody sounds very like you then, is it?
I don't think so. I mean, I sing occasionally, but with Lovers, I never felt... With the album version of Lovers was... that was my vision for how I wanted the track to be laid out, but I really wanted the vocal to be performed by somebody who had a really powerful voice. And the guy who sings on Lovers is the same guy who sings on We Can't Fly, the Lemon thing.
Yeah.
It's a guy called Roger Smith from New York. I mean, my voice is okay, but it's kind of like, if I want some really fantastic, like, flamenco guitar in a track, which I've never ever done, but if I did, I'd get somebody in who knew how to play flamenco guitar rather than sit there trying to do it myself.
No, it definitely sounds like you. Let's talk about vocals, because you are definitely responsible for two of my top vocal tracks. Jump the Next Train is... I distinctly remember playing that in Passion in the UK, and it was just like a moment in my career. It was like, this is the pinnacle, lyrically what it was saying. I know the song was about suicide, and then you had the euphoria of this club, and that sort of juxtaposition I loved, and kind of it helped me with Holding On to Nothing, which was about being twisted and insane and dark. And I loved, that's where, Holding On to Nothing, I was going, yeah, we can take these dark themes and translate it to this music. And Like a Waterfall, again, the vocal is up there with As the Rush Comes With Me. How do you approach vocals and the writing of vocals?
That is something that's kind of like a bone of contention still now to this day. I can come up with a chorus, like Jump the Next Train. I came up with the chorus for that, driving my car back home from somewhere, and it wasn't even sung. It was just like it was supposed to be spoken like the guy from Faithless.
Okay.
And then Ben came into the studio, and then he came up with a melody for it, and then we wrote the rest together. But I really struggle to finish a complete song. The only complete songs I've ever finished are Late Summer Fields and Lovers, I think, and You Write the Rules. Lovers was a really strange one because that just came together. But I'll come up with a great melody for a chorus, but no lyrics. I'll come up with a great chorus and lyrics, and then I can't come up with a verse. I come up with a great verse and a melody for the chorus, but no lyrics. And every time I write lyrics, I always think they're shit. But then when somebody sings them, they sound great. But I just cannot get past this complete lack of confidence in my own lyrics. I signed a publishing deal last year, and a guy called Brian from the publishing company, he's been helping me by reaching out to singers, sending my idea so that they can kind of finish it. For example, with Once, What If Love Was Just Passing Phase, I wrote the whole chorus for that, and the melody and everything, and I recorded it as a demo, but I just couldn't write any verses. They just sounded shit. And I got in touch with Kieran from Ico, and he said, he loved the chorus, and he wrote verses in an hour.
Mm. I know. Look, I think when you read lyrics, they always read terrible. And when I was doing vocal tracks like "Holding On to Nothing" and things like that, when the singer said, "What do you like?" and I said, "I can't tell you what I like. I can tell you exactly what I don't like," and that was that was the only thing I could do.
It needs to be heartfelt. It needs to come from the heart. Like with "Like a Waterfall," Jess wrote the vocals for that over a really something really beautiful that we did call "Under Waterfall," and then it became "Like a Waterfall." But like working on the new Solarstone album now, the one thing that keeps holding me back is the songs. I've got 2 songs now which I'm completely happy with, which again they came from a really great chorus that I'd written, but I just couldn't do the verse. The thing is, when somebody else contributes to your song and then they say, "Well, I've got this," you go, "Well, actually, I prefer the thing I wrote. Can you try singing that?" And then it sounds good. But I don't know if everybody struggles like this, but I'd be so much more productive if I didn't have this kind of lack of confidence in my songs.
I can assure you, I think everybody is like this and wants lyrically to say something and melodically to do something. I think that stands in the productions. You can actually hear that. Jump the Next Train, just still to this day. I went back to it last night and started listening to it, going, "Jeez, I remember the moment and passion playing that, and just the sentiment of that song was just incredible." You've had a huge list of remixers give re-rubs to your tracks, from likes of Guy J. Who else have you had? 16-bit Lolitas and some blokes called Anelia Nelson. How do you find remixers? It's purely a case of, I've been sent a track recently which I really like. Can you do a version of my track using that as a template? Okay. It's that straightforward. I learned how to find remixes from Jerry back in the 90s when we did 7 Cities, and he loved Living Cities by Dead Cities by V1. And he basically said, so I've just sent him the stems for 7 Cities, and I said, remove the hooks of Dead Cities and stick 7 Cities bits over the top. That's it. That's what I want with a remix. I don't want somebody to come up with something completely new which doesn't reference my track. What's the point of that? It's completely pointless. If I have a remix of my track from, say, example, Factor B who's doing a remix of one of my tracks. Actually, I don't think he ever has, but if he did, I'd say to him, "Okay, I love Sapera. Take out a Sapera melody, put in the 7 Cities elements over the top, and there's my remix." That's what I want. I've been guilty of it myself. I remember agreeing to do a remix back in the 90s for Perfecto of a track called New Kicks by Johan as the Space Kittens, and I couldn't find anything in the track that I liked apart from the vocal that went New Kicks. So we did a completely new track and stuck it over the top. And they said, "Well, this is completely irrelevant to New Kicks." And I said, "Yeah, but I didn't like New Kicks." And they said, "Well, why the hell did you agree to do the remix?" Because you were paying me $5,000.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And people agree to do remixes for exposure, and they don't think about it logically. I only want a remix of my track which uses the original chord progression, the original melody, and then their production. That's what I want. I don't want them to change the notes. I don't want them to say, "Well, I changed the chords because I prefer these chords." Yeah. The song is the song is the song. I've even had people remix vocal tracks of my own where they change the phrasing of the words. They've actually started the a cappella in a different place and then said, "Oh, I prefer it like this. This is my artistic vision of the track." That's bullshit. It just means they didn't even listen to the original.
I'm thinking back to the remixes I've done for you, going, "Jesus, how much did I butcher his original?" Hopefully it wasn't too bad. The question on everybody's lips is, how many actual remixes of 7 Cities are there in the world?
Oh. Official ones, there's probably about 20 official ones.
There's
unofficial ones.
There's a playlist on Spotify with 16 mixes on it, so there's at least 6. Yeah.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? I get why people want to do it, but doing remixes of like classic tracks is not a good way to have a career, because the problem is, if you just base your career upon doing remixes of classics, then people eventually, they want to hear an original by you, and then it's usually shit.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's frustrating. I mean, if you reach out to somebody saying, do you want to do a remix of this new Solarstone track? And they go, oh yeah, but can I do Seven Cities as well?
You're like, no! Just
and they say, oh, I did this bootleg of Seven Cities and I played it in the club and everyone went, well, yeah, it's brilliant. And that's because they know the track. It's not because you've put a different kick drum behind it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the successful partnership with Giuseppe, New Energy, Pure Energy, taken from Pure Trance and New Energy. That has been something that the two of you seem to really enjoy doing. Every time you see a photograph of you on stage, it seems like pure enjoyment, doesn't it?
It is. I mean, I love it. We both love it. I mean, we've both been working alone for a very long time, and we've both previously been part of a band, or a duo. But those bands and duos, they ended because we ended up having personal differences with those people. And me and Giuseppe are great friends, and we both respect each other as musicians, and we can both play live. He plays a lot better than me live because I've not been playing live for the past 15 years, whereas Giuseppe's been playing live for the past 15 years. So I'm still kind of getting back into my element and becoming confident as a player. But we both work together extremely fast, and I love playing live with Pure Energy. I mean, there's so much adrenaline there, and it's not like DJing. When you're DJing, you've got the records you're playing to fall back on. I mean, the worst thing you can do is fuck up a mix. With Pure Energy, we're playing live, and if we make mistakes, you're going to hear those mistakes. Seriously bum notes and stuff and that kind of thing. But it doesn't matter because there's so much. We just buzz off each other and we play stuff together, and he plays something which makes me play something, and I love it. I really, really love it, and I do get really nervous as well beforehand, which I don't when I'm DJing. It's amazing.
Can I ask you about the DJing? Has it become a bit sterile from when we started out on vinyl mixing and then to CDJs where you're still mixing, and now it's become sync buttons and stuff? Has it lost something for you, or is it still? No.
I love DJing more now than I ever have. It's because of record box technology and loop. There's so many functions if you have equipment which is actually calibrated correctly. I mean, there's nothing worse than the loop function which doesn't bloody work properly or is slightly out. Mm-hmm. But there's so much with all the effects now and the looping. I love it. You can be really creative. Like, you remember the days when Sasha and Digweed would play and they would put two records together to create something new. Yeah. And then, but that's because records, they had really long mix outs and really long mix ins, and you could do your actual blend became something. Became a new song, right?
Yeah.
And I find now with the looping capabilities of the CDJs and all the effects that you have at your disposal, you can do that again. I find the blending of two records together, that's where I actually start to really enjoy myself, and being able to, for example, in my record box, I've got a folder of like ambient pieces and soundtrack pieces and classical pieces, which I've got a key. I've got the key and the BPM of, so I can, for example, as one track is starting to end, I can loop it. I can find a piece of classical music or a soundtrack. I can introduce that almost like another track, while the other track, the bass line from the other track is continuing, and then I can start the next track to create a build, and then I can burst out of this big sort of rhythmic classical thing into another track. So it's like creating another track from three elements. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do that with CDs, and I couldn't do that with vinyl.
So it's definitely it's about sort of being on the edge and about creating and thinking on your feet and being in the moment, which I think is a kind of a lost art in a lot of the DJing things.
It's easy to. It's very easy to simply mix one record into another with trance, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with mixing two records. It's what you play, but it's also how you play it sometimes. I mean, I sometimes, admittedly, I will do a DJ mix which is just records mixed together, and it's great. But when I've got really good monitors, when I've got the equipment that works properly, I love being creative with it, and just. I mean, I can play like a 2-hour set with only 15 records, just because between those records I'm doing something new.
You can loop up and extend them out. Where's the big pockets for the Pure Trance sound? Is it Asia? Is it South America? Obviously, probably Argentina. Where Australia? How does Europe take to the sound?
It's probably easier to the places where we haven't really reached yet, like Asia, China, Malaysia, Indonesia, places like that. They're still places that have yet to be explored. You know, they're places that we're looking at. America has been our most successful territory for Pure Trance events so far, and that's really great because with the whole resurgence of trance, and personally I think the next year and the following year are going to be really, really big for trance globally. America is a really important market. Yeah, the rest of the world apart from Asia, pretty much.
And that surprises me because that was always our biggest markets when we were doing the trance was, you know, Malaysia, Singapore, Japan was always, they really embraced the trancey sound. So,
but they're late to the party always. They're always late to the party over there. You're going to find in the next 2 years that's where trance is going to be popular, or maybe the next 4 years. But I mean, I did a gig at Sky Garden in Bali, and when I went on, the club was completely full. And by the time I finished, there were only 12 people left.
That sounds like me, DJing.
You just emptied out.
Yeah, bouncers used to come up and thank me, going, "Thank you very much for clearing the club. You're great." So, what does the rest of the year hold for you? What's the sort of plans? Is it get the album finished, get it out, and some more Pure Trance?
Pure Trance 5 is coming in October. The new Solarstone album, aiming for March, and then. Well, I say and then. I mean, that's a huge amount of stuff, and then obviously Pure Trance events, Pure Energy stuff. I've got so much. It never stops.
Right. Well,
I've done it to myself. I've done it to myself. It's my own fault, but
look, but it could be worse. You could be sitting in the studio going, "What am I going to do?" At least you've got a focus and a purpose, and that accounts for so much more. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on Sonic Academy today. It's really great to catch up with you and talk to you again. We haven't probably seen each other in 5-6 years. It's lovely to see that this movement is working for you and things are really happening, and I'm very proud. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. Guys, I hope you all got something from that. It was a great insight into Richard's studio workings and how he builds brands and how DJing and how everything changed. And I hope to see you all very, very soon.